The most painful lie you were ever told wasn't told by an enemy. It was told by hope. The hope that someone, somewhere, was eventually going to show up and make this easier. You know the feeling. Not the dramatic version. The quiet one. The one that lives in the background of a perfectly ordinary day, when you're doing everything right, working hard, staying patient, and somewhere underneath all of it, there's a voice. Small, almost imperceptible, saying, surely someone will notice. Surely something will shift. Surely this can't all be entirely up to me. That voice isn't weakness. It's human, but it may be the single most expensive thing you've ever believed. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years sitting across from men who had started with nothing and built everything. And the one thing that separated the ones who made it from the ones who didn't wasn't talent, timing, or circumstance. It was the moment they stopped waiting. Not with bitterness, not with resignation, with something far more powerful than either of those things. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that something is, and why it changes everything. There's a specific kind of waiting that doesn't look like waiting. It looks like preparation, like being responsible, like the mature, measured approach of someone who has learned from past mistakes and isn't going to rush into anything before the conditions are right. It feels strategic, considered, even wise. And it is, in many situations, exactly those things. But there's another version of this same behavior, wearing the same clothes, using the same language, producing the same outward appearance of thoughtful patience. That is something else entirely. A holding pattern, a way of staying in motion without moving forward, of remaining busy enough to feel productive while avoiding the specific kind of exposure that genuine forward movement actually requires. Hill observed this pattern with a frequency that troubled him. Not in people who were lazy or indifferent or lacking in genuine desire for something better. In people who wanted deeply, who thought seriously about their situation, who could articulate with unusual clarity what they were working toward and why. And who, year after year, were still preparing, still waiting for the right moment, the right resources, the right level of certainty before committing to the direction they had already, in every honest internal conversation, already chosen. He eventually identified what was actually happening underneath the preparation. Not strategy. Fear wearing the costume of strategy. And the specific fear wasn't failure, exactly. Hill found that the fear most people carried into their holding patterns was something more nuanced than the straightforward fear of trying and not succeeding. It was the fear of trying fully, of bringing the complete weight of genuine commitment to a direction, and discovering that even that wasn't enough. Partial effort protects something. If you never fully commit, you never fully fail. The holding pattern preserves a version of the future where the real attempt hasn't happened yet, where the outcome is still undetermined, where the possibility that you could have made it, if you'd really tried, remains intact and untested. Genuine commitment removes that protection, and the mind, which is extraordinarily good at protecting the self from experiences it has learned to associate with pain, will generate remarkably convincing reasons to delay genuine commitment indefinitely, reasons that sound, from the inside, exactly like wisdom. Hill wrote about this dynamic in a way that cuts through the self-deception with unusual precision. He observed that most people never actually make a definite decision about what they want. They make provisional decisions, conditional ones, decisions that contain, embedded within them, the quiet reservation that if things get too difficult, the decision can be revisited. And provisional decisions, Hill found, produce provisional results. Because the deeper mind, the part that actually governs behavior, that determines what you notice and what you don't, what opportunities register as relevant, and which ones pass through your awareness without triggering attention. That part of the mind responds to the quality of commitment behind the decision, not just the content of it. A provisional decision sends a provisional signal, and a provisional signal produces a response that matches its own uncertainty. Here's what makes this genuinely difficult to sit with honestly. The holding pattern feels like caution. It presents itself as the reasonable alternative to recklessness. And in a world that frequently confuses recklessness with courage, it can be genuinely hard to distinguish between the patience that serves you and the waiting that quietly costs you everything. Hill's distinction was precise. Patience in service of a fully committed direction is productive. It allows the work to compound, allows relationships to develop, allows the direction to reveal information that wasn't available at the beginning. Waiting for the conditions that would justify full commitment is something else. It is, in practice, a way of ensuring that full commitment never arrives, because the conditions that would make commitment feel safe enough don't actually exist. They never have. They never will. The men Hill studied who built extraordinary things didn't wait for safety. They built it, from the inside out, through the specific quality of internal commitment that doesn't require external confirmation before it takes itself seriously. And that quality, the specific thing that allowed them to move when everything around them suggested waiting, had a source that most people spend their entire lives never locating. There's a story that never made it into the popular versions of Napoleon Hill's work. Not because Hill didn't document it, because it doesn't fit the version of success most people want to hear. The one where the turning point arrives as a dramatic insight, a fortunate meeting, a single conversation that changed everything. The story Hill kept encountering didn't look like that. It looked like a man sitting alone in a room. No audience. No confirmation. No external signal that what he was about to do made any sense at all. Just a person and a decision and the specific quality of silence that exists between the last moment of waiting and the first moment of actually beginning. Hill became fascinated by what happened in that silence. Because something did happen there. Something that couldn't be explained by the circumstances, which were often genuinely discouraging. Something that couldn't be attributed to confidence, because several of these men described feeling profound uncertainty in exactly that moment. Something that couldn't be reduced to a technique or a practice or anything that could be handed to someone else as a formula. What happened in that silence was a specific kind of surrender. Not the surrender of giving up, the surrender of giving in to something the person had been quietly, persistently, sometimes painfully aware of for a long time, but had been avoiding the full weight of. The understanding that this was theirs to do, not someone else's to initiate and theirs to join. Not something that would begin when the right person recognized their potential or the right circumstances aligned or the right amount of preparation had been accumulated. Theirs. Completely and without qualification. Beginning now with what was currently available from exactly where they currently stood. Hill called this the acceptance of personal responsibility, but the phrase, in its popular usage, has been so thoroughly flattened into cliché that it no longer carries the specific weight of what Hill was actually describing. He wasn't describing the abstract acknowledgement that you are responsible for your own life. Almost everyone can produce that acknowledgement on demand. It costs nothing and changes nothing. He was describing something that happens in the body before it happens in the mind. A specific felt shift, a settling, a kind of internal arrival that occurs when a person stops experiencing their situation as something happening to them and starts experiencing it as something they are actively, specifically, personally in charge of shaping. The distinction between those two experiences is not philosophical. It produces measurably different behavior. A person experiencing their situation as something happening to them scans the environment for what's missing, for what would need to change externally before forward movement becomes possible, for the resource that hasn't arrived yet, the permission that hasn't been granted, the circumstance that hasn't aligned. A person experiencing their situation as something they are personally in charge of shaping scans the environment for something completely different, for what's already present, for what can be used now, with what currently exists, to move in the chosen direction without waiting for anything external to change first. Same environment, completely different search pattern, completely different results. Hill found this perceptual shift between scanning for what's missing and scanning for what's available to be one of the most practically significant differences between the people who built things and the people who spent their lives preparing to build things. And the shift wasn't produced by better circumstances. It was produced by a specific internal decision that changed what the mind was looking for. That decision had a name in Hill's framework. He called it definiteness of purpose, and in its full meaning, not the simplified version, but the actual, demanding, all-the-way version. It describes something considerably more radical than simply having clear goals. It describes a state of mind in which the question of whether to move forward has been permanently removed from the available options. Not suppressed, removed. The way you don't spend energy each morning deciding whether to breathe. The decision has been made at a level deep enough that it no longer surfaces as a question requiring daily re-examination. That level of commitment, the kind that doesn't need to be renewed each morning because it has been embedded deeply enough to become simply who you are now, produces a quality of daily behavior that looks, from the outside, like extraordinary discipline. From the inside, it feels like something much simpler. It feels like finally stopping the exhausting work of keeping one foot in two different directions at once. There's a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. You've probably felt it. Not the physical exhaustion of someone who has worked too many hours or rested too little. Something underneath that. A deeper depletion that persists regardless of how much rest you get, regardless of how productive the day was, regardless of whether anything actually went wrong. A fatigue that seems to have no clear source. Hill encountered this in the men he interviewed who were stuck. Not the ones who had given up, but the ones who were still trying. Still showing up. Still doing the work, at least on the surface, while something underneath the work felt increasingly thin. He found the source. It wasn't overwork. It wasn't discouragement, exactly, though discouragement was often present. It was something more specific and considerably less discussed. The energy cost of internal division. When the direction you're moving and the direction you actually believe you're going are different things. When the conscious effort is pointed one way and the deeper expectation is pointed somewhere else entirely. The mind has to manage that contradiction continuously. Not in a dramatic way. In the same quiet, persistent, background way that a computer manages multiple conflicting processes simultaneously. It slows everything down. It consumes resources that should be available for the actual work. It produces a constant low-grade friction that most people learn to accept as simply the texture of adult life, the inevitable cost of having ambitions that exceed your current circumstances. But Hill found that this friction wasn't inevitable. It was the specific output of a specific condition. A mind running two programs simultaneously, the program of conscious intention and the program of deeper expectation, that were not yet aligned. And the depletion it produced wasn't just unpleasant. It was strategically catastrophic, because the same mental resources consumed by managing internal contradiction are the resources required for the quality of thinking that actually produces results. The creative capacity, the ability to notice what's genuinely available in an environment rather than just what confirms the existing expectation. The specific kind of focused attention that turns ordinary effort into extraordinary output. Internal division doesn't just make you tired. It makes you less capable, less perceptive, less able to bring the full weight of your actual intelligence to bear on the problems that matter most. Hill watched men transform not when they worked harder, but when they resolved the internal contradiction. When the conscious intention and the deeper expectation finally aligned. When the direction they were moving and the direction they believed they were going became the same direction. Something remarkable happened to their output. Not because they suddenly had access to new information or new resources. Because they had access to more of themselves. The energy that had been consumed managing the contradiction became available for the work. And that released energy, applied to the same environment and the same opportunities, produced results that seemed disproportionate to the apparent change in effort. This is what Hill meant when he wrote about the importance of a burning desire. not intensity of wanting, but a quality of wanting so integrated, so fully absorbed into the daily experience of the person doing the wanting, that it stopped creating internal contradiction and started generating internal coherence instead. Coherence is quiet in a way that contradiction never is. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't produce dramatic feelings of confidence or certainty. It produces something more useful than either of those things. Clarity. The specific, functional clarity of a mind that knows what it's doing and why, that doesn't have to negotiate with itself before every decision, that can bring its full capacity to bear on what's actually in front of it rather than spending half that capacity managing the gap between what it's trying to do and what it secretly expects to happen. That clarity is available to you, not through a technique, through a decision made deeply enough that it stops being a decision and starts being a fact about who you are. I want to pause here. If something in what I just described is landing somewhere real, if you recognize that particular exhaustion, the one that sleep doesn't fix, I want you to write the words "I am ready" in the comments right now. Not as a declaration to anyone else, as a signal to yourself that you are done managing the contradiction, that the direction has been chosen, that the internal negotiation is over. The people who write those words today aren't performing optimism. They're making a specific, internal claim about which version of themselves is going to be in charge going forward. Write it, and stay with me, because what comes next is the part most people miss. The specific reason why the decision alone, however genuine, isn't sufficient, and what Hill found was always required alongside it. Here's something Hill documented that most people who study his work never fully absorb. The decision is necessary. It is not sufficient. Hill watched men make genuine, deeply felt decisions about the direction of their lives, decisions that were real, that came from an honest place, that carried genuine emotional weight in the moment they were made, and then watched those same decisions quietly dissolve over the following weeks and months, not through any dramatic reversal, but through the gradual, almost imperceptible erosion of daily life. Not because the men were weak, not because the decisions weren't real, because a decision, however genuine, is made at a single point in time. And life doesn't happen at a single point in time. It happens in the accumulated texture of ordinary days, in the small moments, the unremarkable choices, the automatic responses to familiar situations that occur dozens of times before noon without ever rising to the level of conscious deliberation. And in those ordinary moments, the decision made last Tuesday has very little authority. What has authority in those moments is something built through repetition rather than through resolve. The habits, the automatic patterns, the grooves worn into daily behavior by years of doing things a certain way, responding to certain triggers in certain predictable directions, making the same kind of choice in the same kind of situation without ever stopping to examine whether that choice is actually aligned with the direction that was consciously chosen. Hill understood the gap between decision and habit as one of the most consequential gaps in human experience. A person can decide to become wealthy and still automatically spend money in ways that contradict that decision, not through hypocrisy, through the simple fact that the decision lives in the conscious mind while the spending behavior lives somewhere much older, much deeper, much less accessible to the influence of what was decided on a Tuesday. The decision needs to be translated, not just held, translated from the language of conscious intention into the language the deeper behavioral system actually responds to. And the translation happens through a specific process Hill described with unusual precision in his work, not through affirmations repeated without feeling, not through visualization practiced without genuine emotional engagement, through the specific, patient, daily work of acting in every available moment, as if the decision has already produced the identity it's working toward, not performing the identity, inhabiting it. There's a difference, and the difference is everything. Performance is external. It's the behavior adopted to signal to others, and to yourself, that the decision has been made. It feels effortful because it is effortful. It requires constant conscious maintenance because it has no roots in the deeper behavioral system. It's a costume, not a character. Inhabiting the identity is different. It begins with the same behavioral choices, from the outside indistinguishable from performance. But it's oriented differently. Instead of asking what someone with this identity would do in order to appear successful, it asks what someone with this identity would naturally do because that's simply who they are. The question sounds similar. The internal experience of asking it produces completely different behavior. And the behavior, repeated consistently across enough ordinary days, begins to do what repetition always eventually does. It builds the groove, the automatic pattern, the default response, the thing you do without deciding to do it, because it has been practiced into the level of behavior that operates below the threshold of conscious deliberation. This is how the decision becomes real, not in the moment it's made. In the 10,000th ordinary moment when you make the aligned choice automatically, without effort, without internal negotiation, because the groove has been worn deep enough that the aligned choice has become simply what you do. Hill found something specific about the people who successfully built these grooves that separated them from the people who understood the principle but never actually applied it at the level required. Something about the relationship they had with the ordinary moments, the ones nobody watches, the ones that don't feel significant while they're happening, the ones that seem too small to be consequential. Something that changed everything about how those moments were experienced and what they therefore produced. Hill made an observation that seems almost too simple to be significant until you sit with it long enough to feel its full weight. He said the most important work a person ever does happens when no one is watching. Not as a moral statement about integrity, as a mechanical observation about how genuine transformation actually gets built. Because here's what most people fundamentally misunderstand about the process of changing their own lives. They treat the visible moments as the real ones. The presentation, the meeting, the conversation with someone who matters, the day when something significant is actually at stake. Those feel like the moments that count. The moments when real effort is warranted. When the full version of who you're trying to become needs to show up. And the ordinary moments, the Tuesday afternoon when nothing is happening, the quiet hour when no one is paying attention, the small daily choice that seems too inconsequential to be worth treating seriously. Those feel like the space between the real moments. The filler, the background against which the actual important stuff occasionally occurs. Hill found this understanding completely inverted from reality. The ordinary moments are not the space between the important ones. They are where the important ones get decided. Because what you do in the visible, high-stakes moment isn't actually decided in that moment. It's decided in the accumulated weight of the ordinary ones that preceded it. The visible moment simply reveals what the ordinary moments have been building. The automatic pattern, the default response, the groove behavior that emerges under pressure because it has been practiced until it runs without conscious direction. The person who performs brilliantly in the high-stakes moment didn't become that person in that moment. They became that person in the Tuesday afternoons nobody watched. Hill documented this with unusual care because he found it explained something that puzzled observers of successful people, the specific quality of ease that the most capable people seem to bring to difficult situations. The apparent effortlessness that looked, from outside, like exceptional talent or exceptional confidence. It wasn't effortlessness. It was practiced effort that had crossed the threshold into automaticity. The difficulty had been done earlier, in private, in the ordinary moments that didn't feel significant enough to be worth treating seriously, in the repetitions that built the groove so deep that when the difficult moment arrived, the right response was simply what happened, not what was decided, not what was forced, just what came naturally from a system that had been built to produce exactly that. This reframes something important about how you should think about your own ordinary moments. Not as filler, as the actual material your future is being built from. Every moment you respond to a financial trigger the way the new version of you would respond, rather than the way the old automatic pattern would have responded, you are building something real, laying something down in the behavioral architecture that will eventually produce the automatic, effortless response in the high-stakes moment. Every moment you don't, every moment the old pattern runs unchallenged because the situation seemed too small to be worth the effort of conscious redirection, you are also building something, reinforcing the groove that was already there, making the automatic response slightly more automatic, slightly more deeply embedded, slightly harder to interrupt the next time it activates. There is no neutral moment. Every ordinary Tuesday is either building the person you're trying to become or reinforcing the person you're trying to leave behind. Not dramatically, not with any single moment being decisive. Through the quiet, relentless, deeply underestimated power of repetition applied to the level of behavior where actual character is stored. Hill found something specific about the people who understood this, who had genuinely internalized the significance of the ordinary moment rather than just intellectually accepting it, that changed everything about how they moved through their days. They stopped waiting for the significant moment to show up as themselves. They showed up as themselves in every moment that was available. And that quality, that specific, consistent, unperformative presence of the person they were becoming in every unremarkable moment of every ordinary day, produced something that accumulated faster and more powerfully than any dramatic effort applied only in the moments that felt important enough to warrant it. But there's a specific challenge that emerges when someone genuinely tries to live this way, something that Hill found derailed more people than almost any other single obstacle in the entire process of genuine transformation. Something that arrives not in the dramatic moments, where its presence would be obvious, but in the quiet ones, where it's almost impossible to recognize for what it actually is. Hill described it carefully, because it was the kind of obstacle that resists direct description. Not because it's complicated, because it disguises itself so effectively as something reasonable that most people never recognize it as an obstacle at all. It arrives in the quiet moments. In the ordinary Tuesday afternoons we just finished discussing. In the space between intention and action, when nothing external is demanding anything and the choice of what to do next belongs entirely to you. And it sounds like this. Not yet. Not dramatically. Not as a refusal. As a gentle, almost imperceptible postponement. A quiet suggestion that the aligned choice, the one that corresponds to the person you're trying to become, belongs to a slightly later version of this moment. After this one thing is handled, after this particular circumstance has resolved, after some unnamed threshold of readiness has been reached that will make the aligned choice feel more natural, more earned, more genuinely representative of who you actually are rather than who you're trying to become. Not yet sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the responsible recognition that you're not quite ready, that the action would be premature. That patience is the appropriate response to a moment that hasn't fully ripened. And sometimes it is exactly that. But Hill found that in the lives of people who remained stuck, who wanted genuinely, who understood clearly, who could articulate with real precision what they were working toward and why, not yet was the primary mechanism of their stagnation. Not dramatic failure, not external obstacles. The quiet, daily, almost invisible postponement of the aligned choice in favor of a slightly more comfortable version of the present moment. Each individual postponement was small enough to be entirely reasonable. Their cumulative effect was a life. Hill made a distinction here that cuts through the self-deception with unusual precision. He separated waiting that serves the direction from waiting that substitutes for it. Waiting that serves the direction has a specific quality. It is active. Something is happening during the wait. Information being gathered, relationships being built, resources being assembled, that will make the next action more effective than immediate action would have been. The waiting has a defined purpose and a defined endpoint. It is in service of the direction, not a substitute for committing to it. Waiting that substitutes for the direction has a different quality entirely. It is passive in the specific sense that nothing is happening during the wait that actually serves the forward movement. The waiting is simply the absence of the action that was available. And its endpoint is not defined, because it cannot be defined, because what would actually end it is not the arrival of better conditions, but the willingness to act in the conditions that already exist. Most people, if they are genuinely honest with themselves, can feel the difference between these two kinds of waiting. One feels purposeful, like you are in motion even while you are still. The other feels like relief, like the specific relief of having avoided something that would have required more of you than you were willing to give in that particular moment. That relief, that small, quiet, almost pleasant sense of having successfully postponed exposure, is the signature feeling of the obstacle Hill was describing. And the reason it's so effective at holding people in place is that it never feels like a significant choice. No single instance of not yet feels like the decision that determines your future. Each one is too small, too reasonable, too easily justified by the specific circumstances of the moment. But accumulated across enough ordinary days, those small postponements become the architecture of a life that never quite arrived at the place the person living it always believed was coming. Hill found the antidote to this obstacle in something that sounds almost confrontationally simple. Action, taken now, in the conditions that exist, with what is currently available, before readiness arrives, because readiness is not a condition that precedes action, it is a condition that action produces. Not reckless action, not action without thought. The specific, deliberate, immediate translation of the aligned choice into actual behavior in the moment that the aligned choice is available, before not yet can assemble its case, before the postponement can make itself sound reasonable. In the specific window between recognizing the aligned choice and the arrival of the voice that suggests waiting, a window that is, in most moments, much shorter than people realize, something has to happen. If you've stayed with me until this point in the video, it's because you're committed to creating a life of abundance and success. That's why I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Every video here is designed to help you develop the mindset that attracts wealth, prosperity, and new opportunities every single day. He'll notice something about action that contradicts almost everything people assume about how motivation actually works. Most people believe motivation precedes action, that the sequence is feel ready, feel confident, feel sufficiently motivated, and then act, carried forward by the momentum of those feelings into behavior that expresses them naturally. Hill found the sequence was almost exactly reversed in the people who actually built things. Action preceded the feeling, not always dramatically, often in small, almost unremarkable ways. A phone call made before confidence arrived. A first draft written before clarity arrived. A conversation initiated before certainty arrived. A step taken in the specific window between recognizing that the step was available and the arrival of the voice that would explain, convincingly and at length, why this particular moment wasn't quite right for it. The feeling, the confidence, the clarity, the sense of readiness came afterward, generated by the action rather than generating it. Hill described this in his writing on initiative, the principle that action taken in advance of perfect conditions creates the conditions that make further action possible, not through magic, through the specific, mechanical way that doing something changes both the external environment and the internal experience of the person doing it. When you act before you feel ready, something happens that waiting for readiness never produces. You find out what actually happens, not what you feared would happen, not what the postponing voice warned you about. What actually happens when you take the step in the imperfect conditions that actually exist, with the imperfect resources you actually have, as the imperfect version of yourself that actually shows up. And what actually happens is almost never what the not yet voice predicted. It is usually smaller, more manageable, more instructive and less catastrophic than the anticipated version that made waiting feel like prudence. And surviving what actually happens, engaging with the real version of the difficulty rather than the imagined version, does something to the nervous system that no amount of preparation ever accomplishes. It updates the threat assessment. The deeper mind, which generates the feeling of not being ready based on its best prediction of what the action will cost, updates that prediction based on actual experience. And actual experience, in the overwhelming majority of cases, is less expensive than the prediction, which means every action taken before readiness arrives makes the next action slightly less frightening. Not because you've become braver in some abstract sense, because the database of actual outcomes has been updated with real information rather than predicted information. And real information about what actually happens when you act in imperfect conditions is almost always less alarming than the predictions the postponing voice generates in the absence of it. Hill found that the men who built the most extraordinary things were not, in the early stages of their journeys, particularly fearless. Several of them described significant fear in the specific moments before the actions that eventually changed everything. What distinguished them wasn't the absence of fear. It was a specific relationship with fear that most people never develop. They had learned, through repeated experience of acting before readiness and discovering that what actually happened was survivable, to treat the feeling of not being ready as information rather than instruction. Information about the current state of their nervous system, about what the deeper mind predicted would happen based on its existing database of experience, not instruction about whether to proceed. That distinction, between receiving fear as information and receiving it as instruction, is one of the most practically significant things a person can develop, and it cannot be developed through understanding it. Only through the accumulated experience of acting in its presence and discovering, again and again, that what actually happens is something you can work with. The window between recognizing the aligned choice and the arrival of postponement is where this development happens. It is not a large window. Often it is seconds. The moment of recognition. I could make this call. I could send this message. I could take this step. And then, almost immediately, the assembly of reasons why this particular moment isn't quite right. In that window, something is available that isn't available once the postponement has made its case. Pure, uncontested access to the aligned choice. Before the argument against it has been fully constructed. Before the not yet has recruited the specific details of your current circumstances to make its case. Before the voice has reminded you of the last time something similar didn't go the way you hoped. In that window, the choice is simply there, waiting to be taken or postponed. And the pattern of what you do in that window, across hundreds of ordinary moments, is what eventually determines whether the life you're building corresponds to the person you decided to become or the person the postponing voice kept insisting you weren't quite ready to be yet. There's something else Hill found about what happens to the person who consistently chooses action in that window. Something about what accumulates that goes beyond the external results the actions produce. Something that changes the quality of the person doing the acting in a way that can't be reversed by changing circumstances. Hill returned to this idea late in his research, after he had already documented enough external transformations to fill volumes. He had spent years focused on outcomes, on what the work produced in the world, the wealth built, the businesses established, the financial circumstances transformed beyond what the people living them had once believed was available to someone with their specific history. But the longer he spent with the men who had genuinely completed this transformation, the more his attention shifted from what they had produced to what they had become. Because something had happened to these men during the process that didn't show up in any external measure of success. Something that wasn't captured by the bank account or the business results or the visible markers of what their effort had accumulated. Something internal, quiet, almost invisible from outside. A quality Hill found genuinely difficult to name with precision because the language available to him, confidence, self-belief, resilience, all carried associations that didn't quite capture what he was observing. He eventually settled on a phrase that sounds simple and contains more than it initially appears to. He called it the knowledge of personal resource. Not confidence in the motivational sense, the feeling of certainty that things will go well. Something more fundamental and considerably more durable than that. The specific, experiential knowledge, held not as belief but as lived, verified, personally confirmed fact, that when difficulty arrives, something inside you is capable of responding to it, not capable of preventing it, not capable of guaranteeing a specific outcome, capable of engaging with it, of finding something to work with in whatever the difficulty actually contains, of continuing to move when movement requires something you weren't sure you had until the moment you actually needed it. This knowledge, and Hill was precise about calling it knowledge rather than belief, because it is earned through experience rather than adopted through conviction, changes everything about how a person encounters the future. A person who believes they are capable has something fragile. Belief can be undermined by a bad day, by a significant failure, by the accumulation of outcomes that contradict the belief until the belief can no longer sustain itself against the evidence. A person who knows they are capable has something different. Knowledge built from actual experience is not undermined by difficulty. It is, if anything, confirmed by it. Because the knowledge was built through difficulty, through the specific, repeated experience of encountering something hard and discovering that something inside you was capable of working with it. Difficulty doesn't contradict the knowledge. It confirms it. This is the specific shift in relationship with hardship that Hill kept finding in the men whose transformations had genuinely held over time. Not that hardship had become pleasant or that they had developed some special immunity to the experience of things going wrong. They had developed a relationship with hardship in which its arrival no longer carried the same existential weight it once had. Before the work, difficulty meant something about them, about what was available to them, about whether the direction they had chosen was actually viable for someone with their specific combination of resources and history and starting point. After the work, difficulty meant something much simpler, something that required attention, something to be understood, engaged with, and moved through. Something that would, if approached with genuine curiosity rather than defensive fear, reveal the specific information needed to navigate it. Not a verdict on the direction, a feature of the terrain. Hill found that this shift, from experiencing difficulty as verdict to experiencing it as terrain, was one of the most practically significant transformations the work produced. Not because it made the journey easier in any objective sense, because it made the full range of the journey available. When difficulty is a verdict, you build your life around avoiding it. You make choices designed to minimize exposure to the situations where things might go wrong, which means making choices designed to stay within the territory your existing capability has already confirmed is safe. The life that results is bounded by what you have already done, which is always smaller than what you are actually capable of. When difficulty is terrain, you can go anywhere. Not recklessly, not without genuine assessment of real risk and real consequence, but without the invisible ceiling that the avoidance of difficulty places on every life it governs. The knowledge of personal resource removes that ceiling, not by making you exceptional, by making you honest about the fact that you were never as limited as the not yet voice insisted, that the capability was there before the work confirmed it. The work just provided the specific kind of evidence that the deeper mind actually responds to. Not argument, not inspiration, not the testimony of someone else who made it through something difficult. Your own experience, your own encounter with the actual texture of difficulty, your own discovery, in the specific moment when something was genuinely hard and you continued anyway, that something inside you was sufficient for what the moment required. That discovery, made once, begins something. Made repeatedly, across the ordinary moments nobody watches, It builds something that cannot be taken away by changing circumstances, by market shifts, by the inevitable reversals that visit every life without exception. Something that belongs entirely to you. And that belonging, that specific, unborrowable, experientially confirmed sense of your own resource, is worth more than any single outcome the process might produce. Because outcomes change. What you become in the process of pursuing them doesn't. There's a version of this story that gets told often, and it's not entirely wrong, but it leaves out something essential. The version where the person who stops waiting and starts building does it in heroic isolation. Where the refusal to wait for rescue becomes a kind of self-sufficient solitude, a turning inward that replaces the dependency on others with a fierce, proud independence that needs nothing from anyone. That version is romantic. It's also, Hill found, largely fictional. Not because the men he studied didn't develop genuine self-reliance. They did. The kind of self-reliance we've been discussing, the knowledge of personal resource, the capacity to act in imperfect conditions, the ability to continue when nothing external confirms that continuing is the right choice. All of that was real and essential. But Hill found something else in these stories that the heroic isolation version consistently omits. Almost none of them actually build alone. Not in the way the story usually gets told. Not in the sense of being genuinely, completely, without the specific kind of support that made the difference between sustained momentum and eventual collapse back into the old pattern. What they had wasn't rescue. It wasn't someone doing the work for them, or solving the problems for them, or providing the certainty that the direction was right. What they had was something more specific and considerably more interesting. They had at least one person who treated their direction as real before the external evidence confirmed it. Hill called this the mastermind principle, and in his full description of it, not the simplified networking version, but the actual thing he was observing, it describes something that goes deeper than collaboration or accountability or any of the ways the concept usually gets reduced. It describes the specific value of another mind that holds your direction with genuine conviction at the moments when your own conviction is running thin. And conviction runs thin. For everyone. Regardless of how genuine the original decision was, regardless of how thoroughly the identity work has been done, regardless of how much the knowledge of personal resource has been built through accumulated experience. There are days when the external environment is providing so much contradicting evidence, when the gap between where you are and where you're going is so visible and so wide, when the not yet voice has assembled such a thorough and specific case for reconsidering, that sustaining the direction from purely internal resources feels genuinely, not just temporarily, impossible. In those moments, something specific happens when there is another person present, physically or otherwise, who holds the direction with real conviction. Not performing conviction to make you feel better, actually holding it, because they have seen enough of what you're building, understand enough of where you're going, and have enough genuine belief in the alignment between your capability and your direction to treat the outcome as real, even when your own certainty has temporarily collapsed. Hill found that this specific experience of having your direction held by someone whose judgment you trust, during the moments when you cannot fully hold it yourself, was worth more in the difficult middle of genuine transformation than almost any external resource. It doesn't do the work for you. It keeps the direction alive long enough for you to do the work yourself. And keeping the direction alive, sustaining the genuine commitment through the periods when sustaining it requires more than internal resources alone can provide, is often the entire difference between a transformation that completes itself and one that dissolves, quietly and without drama, back into the comfortable territory of the old pattern. This is not a contradiction of everything we've covered about personal responsibility. It is the full version of it. Personal responsibility doesn't mean building in isolation. It means owning the direction completely, owning it enough to actively seek what the direction requires, including the specific quality of relationship that makes sustained commitment possible in the seasons when internal resources alone aren't sufficient. Hill found that the men who understood this, who took responsibility for the quality of their relational environment with the same seriousness they brought to the quality of their internal work, built faster, sustained longer, and recovered from setbacks more completely than the men who treated self-reliance as synonymous with solitude. But there's something Hill found about what happens in the absence of this. Something about what the person who genuinely has no one holding their direction tends to do instead, often without realizing it. That explains a pattern of behavior most people recognize immediately when it's described, but have never quite been able to name. Hill noticed a specific behavioral pattern in the men who had been building without anyone holding their direction. Not the ones who had given up, the ones who were still going, still showing up, still doing the work, at least on the surface, while something underneath the work had quietly shifted in a way that was changing everything about what the work was actually producing. He described it as building in circles, not literally. The activity was real. The effort was genuine. The hours invested were substantial, but the direction of the effort had, without the person realizing it, gradually rotated from forward movement toward something else, toward the management of uncertainty. Here's what that actually looks like in practice. A person building alone, without anyone genuinely holding their direction, eventually runs into a period where the external evidence is uniformly discouraging. Not catastrophically, just consistently. The results aren't matching the effort. The timeline is extending beyond what was originally anticipated. The gap between current reality and desired outcome feels, in the specific quality of that particular season, wider than it did at the beginning. And in the absence of a relationship that holds the direction with genuine conviction, the person has only one resource available for managing this discouragement: their own mind, which is, at that particular moment, already strained, already consuming significant resources managing the gap between intention and outcome, already working harder than it should have to maintain the direction against the weight of contradicting evidence. And so the person does what strained minds do when they're trying to manage uncertainty without sufficient support. They generate activity, not forward-directed activity, uncertainty managing activity. The specific kind of busyness that feels productive because it occupies time and attention, but that is actually oriented toward reducing the felt experience of uncertainty rather than toward advancing the direction. More research, more planning, more refinement of the approach, more consumption of content about people who succeeded at similar things, more preparation for a step that keeps getting slightly more prepared for without ever quite getting taken. None of this feels like avoidance. From the inside, it feels like diligence, like the responsible recognition that more information, more preparation, more certainty about the approach would make the next step more effective. It feels, in other words, exactly like the waiting that looks like strategy that we discussed near the beginning of this conversation, and it produces exactly the same results. Hill found this pattern so consistent in people building without genuine relational support that he eventually treated the absence of a mastermind relationship not as a personal preference, but as a strategic liability. Not because solitary effort is impossible, because the specific cognitive load of managing sustained uncertainty without any external support eventually redirects the mental resources required for forward movement toward the management of the uncertainty itself. And a mind primarily occupied with managing uncertainty is not a mind primarily occupied with building. The work continues. The hours accumulate. But the direction has rotated, subtly and without announcement, from forward toward circular. This is recoverable. Hill was clear about that. The rotation isn't permanent. The direction can be reestablished. The forward movement can resume. But recovering it, once the circular pattern has set in, requires something that most people in that situation find genuinely difficult to access. Honesty about what has actually been happening. Not self-criticism, Not the addition of another layer of self-judgment to an internal landscape that is already carrying more than it should. Just the specific, clear-eyed recognition that the activity of the recent period has been primarily oriented toward managing uncertainty rather than advancing the direction. And that recognition, once genuinely made, opens something. Not immediately. Not without the discomfort of seeing clearly what has been obscured by the busyness of the circular pattern. But genuinely, it reopens the question that was being avoided by the activity. What is the next actual step? Not the next research project. Not the next refinement of the plan. The next actual step. The specific, concrete, forward-directed action that would advance the direction if it were taken rather than being prepared for. Hill found that people who could ask that question honestly, and then take the step that answered it before the not-yet voice had time to assemble its case, consistently broke the circular pattern within days. Not by resolving the uncertainty that had produced it, by acting in its presence. Which brings us, finally, to the question that has been building underneath everything we've covered together. The question that the title of this video poses, but that we've been approaching from every angle except directly. Who exactly is the plan? Not as a declaration, as a lived, specific, moment-by-moment reality. What does it actually mean? In the ordinary Tuesday, in the window between recognition and postponement, in the quiet moment when no one is watching and the aligned choice is available, to be the plan. Let's go back to where we started. The most painful lie you were ever told wasn't told by an enemy. It was told by hope. The hope that someone was coming. That the circumstances would eventually align themselves into something that made forward movement feel safe enough to begin. That the version of your life you carry somewhere underneath the ordinary surface of your days would arrive when enough conditions had been met, enough preparation had been done, enough evidence had accumulated that the direction was viable before you committed to it fully. That hope isn't malicious. It's the mind's way of making the present bearable while deferring the exposure that genuine commitment actually requires. But Hill found, across 20 years and hundreds of documented lives, that the hope itself was the obstacle. Not because wanting things is wrong, because the specific structure of waiting for external conditions to make internal commitment feel justified is a structure that can be maintained indefinitely without ever resolving. There will always be one more condition that hasn't been met, one more preparation that hasn't been completed, one more piece of evidence that would make the next step feel sufficiently warranted. The wait has no natural endpoint, only a chosen one. And the men Hill studied who built extraordinary lives from genuinely ordinary beginnings all reached the same chosen endpoint, described in different words but pointing toward the same specific moment. The moment they understood, fully and without reservation, that they were the plan, not as inspiration, as fact, as the simple, clear, unadorned recognition that no other plan existed. That no one was assembling the conditions for their success in some other room. That the life they wanted would be built by them, from what was currently available, beginning now, or it would not be built at all. That recognition didn't feel like empowerment in the stories Hill collected. It felt like weight. The specific, serious, clarifying weight of genuine responsibility fully accepted. Not the abstract acknowledgement of responsibility that costs nothing and changes nothing. The felt weight of understanding that this specific life, this specific direction, this specific gap between where you are and where you're capable of going, belongs entirely and without qualification to you. And then, something interesting happened to the weight. Not immediately, not in the dramatic moment of recognition itself, but in the days that followed, as the person who had accepted the weight began actually moving under it, began taking the steps that were available in the conditions that existed, without waiting for a better version of either, the nature of the weight changed. It became less like burden and more like ballast. The thing that kept the direction steady in rough water. The thing that prevented the not-yet voice from successfully redirecting the movement into the comfortable management of uncertainty. The thing that made the ordinary Tuesday significant rather than filler, because every ordinary Tuesday was now part of something that was entirely, specifically, personally yours. Hill found that people who had accepted this weight, genuinely and completely, moved differently. Not faster, necessarily. With more of themselves. The internal division between the conscious direction and the deeper expectation began to close. Not because the doubt disappeared, but because the doubt had been deprived of the argument it most depended on. The argument that perhaps the conditions weren't right yet. That perhaps more preparation was warranted. That perhaps someone or something would eventually arrive to make the path clearer before genuine commitment was required. Once that argument was genuinely, experientially unavailable, once the person had accepted at the level where it actually mattered that nobody was coming, that they were the plan, that the next step was theirs to take, and theirs alone, the doubt still visited, but it visited differently. As a passenger rather than a driver. Present, acknowledged, sometimes genuinely uncomfortable, but no longer in possession of the keys. And the person with genuine possession of their own direction, moving through ordinary days with the weight of complete ownership rather than the lightness of perpetual deferral, builds something that the waiting never could have built. Not just the external outcome. Themselves. The specific version of themselves that only becomes available through the experience of moving without rescue, building without guarantee, continuing without confirmation, and discovering, in the accumulated texture of those ordinary, unwitnessed moments, that they were always capable of exactly this. That the capability was never waiting to be unlocked by better circumstances. It was waiting to be claimed, by the only person who was ever going to claim it. There is no better moment than this one. There is no more ready version of you waiting in a future where the conditions have finally aligned. There is this moment, these conditions, this version of you, and the step that is available right now, before the not yet voice finishes assembling its case, before the postponement makes itself sound reasonable, before another ordinary Tuesday passes without becoming the one where something actually changed. Nobody is coming. You already knew that. The only question that was ever worth asking is what you're going to do with the knowing. If this video gave you something real, something that landed below the surface of simply understanding, follow the channel and share it with 5 people who are still waiting for someone to arrive. Every video here exists for one reason: to help you become the person who was never actually waiting in the first place.